Under Standing Order 36, we welcome Minister Heather Humphreys. And in what looks like being a local affair, we welcome Deputy Matt Carthy with question number 1, please.
Garamaigat Cancorla, and can I begin by welcoming the Palestinian national women's soccer team to Ireland and to commend the Bohemians Club for hosting the squad for their match this evening. Minister, what does it say about your party's record after 13 years in government that families are forced to go onto the media to beg for the services that their children with disabilities are legally entitled to? Recently, another desperate mother had to go public to report that her little boy has missed out on starting school later this year because he hasn't received his assessment of needs. In fact, the HSE have confirmed that there are almost 10,000 children awaiting assessment of needs that your government is obliged to provide within 3 months. All over the state, there are little boys and little girls who need help and services. Their parents know this, their childcare providers or teachers know this, very often their young siblings know this. But they cannot access that help or the services they need. Many cannot access appropriate school places or special protection supports without an assessment. They cannot get access to services with or without an assessment because of intolerable waiting lists. Minister, can you imagine the frustration, the pain, the anger of a mother or father who knows that their child's life can improve drastically if only they could get access to an occupational therapist or to speech and language therapy or a place in the right class in the right school, but find that your government's failures is preventing them from getting a fair chance of accessing those things? Minister, an assessment of needs identifies whether a person has a disability, any health and educational needs that arise from that disability, as well as what services are required to meet those needs. Your government has a legal obligation to provide these under the Disability Act. But through to Fine Gael form, your government had been trying to shortcut the assessment process and were called out by the High Court. You are now overseeing record waiting lists for assessments, and 8,000 of the children are waiting over the 3 months. Some parents have gone to the expense of getting assessments carried out privately, but the HSE will not accept them, while of course many families do not have even the wherewithal to even consider that option. And for those who do receive an assessment of needs, very often they find that their battle has just begun. Waiting lists for OTs, for speech and language and other services are disgracefully long. Many find that the special education requirements of their child cannot be met because your government continues to play catch-up rather than plan for the educational needs of children that you know are coming into the system. And the problem is, of course, worst in our own county of Monaghan. That is just one of 2 counties that doesn't have a special school, despite the need being identified many years ago. So, Minister, can I ask, what do you say to the mother today who is looking at her little boy that does not have a school place next September? What do you say to those parents who are wondering when their child will receive the diagnosis that they need for educational and health supports? What do you say to those who have been assessed, who know what their child's needs are, but who are being told that those needs will not be met? And after 13 years in government, what assurance can you give to those families who have had to fight your government every single day of their child's life just to get the services that will allow those children to have the start that every parent would want for their son or daughter?
Gurmaigut Cancorla, and I just want to thank the Deputy for raising this issue, and I know that it's one both you and I are committed to seeing progress on. We all have the experience in representing our constituents of meeting parents, and both of us have done that, who are waiting too long for the assessment of their children's needs, and unfortunately then for the therapies they also need. We must do all we can to relieve the pressure on these families and on frontline staff. You know that the Taoiseach established a new Cabinet Committee on Children, Education and Disability, which includes all responsible ministers and departments. This committee has already met on a number of occasions and the issue of disability has been front and centre. And I know at the most recent meeting there was a focus on the waiting list for assessment of need and how we can increase the use of the private sector to deliver results for families waiting long periods. Private assessments are already taking place, with 16.5 million already set aside for the HSE to procure diagnostic ASD assessments through the private sector. We are examining what more we can do, Deputy. That work is very much being led by the Taoiseach, and who is working extremely closely with Minister Anne Rabbitte and Minister Stephen Donnelly. And I just want to say about Minister Rabbitte, she came to our own constituency, she came up to Monaghan, she met the people first hand, she spoke to them, and there's no better person to advocate and to work extremely hard for the rights of people with special needs and with disabilities. And I'm pleased to tell you today, Deputy, that Minister Rabbitte, along with the Taoiseach and Minister Donnelly, is spearheading a new long waiting lists initiative. That will be announced very shortly, and that's going to be underpinned by both investment and, importantly, a real sense of urgency to address this issue. You mentioned also children with special educational needs to receive a high quality education is also a priority for this government. Over a quarter of the entire education budget is dedicated to special education, and Minister Hildegard Naughton, who sits at the Cabinet table, takes responsibility for this portfolio. In that capacity, she is determined to be a voice for special education and inclusion at the highest level of government. The new Cabinet Committee on Children, Education and Disability includes all responsible ministers and departments, and I know that Minister Naughton is reviewing the need for special schools across the country, and that's something she's working on along with Minister Foley. And absolutely, Deputy, I do know, like you know, the need for a new special needs school in Monaghan. We have a very, very fine upgraded facility in Cootehill in County Cavan, the Holy Family School, that recently got a multi-million euro investment. It's state-of-the-art, but unfortunately there's a waiting list there, and there's more and more children that require this service, and this government is committed to providing the services that we need to make sure that our children get priority.
Thank you, Minister Humphreys. Deputy.
See, Minister, all of that would count for something if this problem had just emerged in the past number of weeks or number of months. This problem has been getting steadily worse under this government, and for all the task force and all the reviews that you propose, there are immediate solutions that need to be implemented now. David Cullinan has told your government what they are. Pauline Tully has told your government what they are. Other members of the opposition have told your government what they are. Most importantly, the families of the children involved and the professionals directly involved in providing these services have told your government what the solutions are. You need to end the recruitment embargo on HSE primary care services. You need to fully resource and staff children's disability teams. You need to end the disparity between HSE and Section 39 disability providers. You need to plan special education places. We don't need a review. We don't need an assessment to tell us that County Monaghan and County Leitrim, the two counties without special schools, need them. We need the plan in place to deliver it as a matter of urgency, and we need to implement a comprehensive workforce plan to sustainably staff the health services and end the excruciating waiting list. Minister, I asked you, what will you say to those families today who are in dire circumstances because their children are being denied the services that they need right now? I think they deserve an answer to those very important questions.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister.
Look, Deputy, I know the parent you're talking about. I've spoken to that lady too. And I know the difficulties she faces. I know she's tried about 4 different schools and she's having difficulties. I know that, and we're doing all we can to support her. And we do need to explore greater use of the private sector when it comes to the assessment of needs. We also need to grow the teams within the HSE, which are providing much needed therapies, and increase training places within our third level sector so that we improve services, increase capacity and reduce wait lists. In this regard, the Progressing Disability Services Roadmap 23 to 26 36 was launched last October. It focuses on the ongoing development of children's disability network teams and services to meet current and growing demand. We are investing greatly into CDNTs, with funding equating to almost 800 whole-time equivalent posts, including around 175 therapy assistant posts approved in this year's budget. And can I just say there was no derogation, or there was no embargo on recruiting children, on recruiting people who could carry out assessment of needs for children. There was a derogation on that in terms of staffing. So there was total. All the resources that we could find and put into that has been put into it. So there has been a lot done in that area, and I agree that we have to do more.
Now, the Leader of the Labour Party, Deputy Ivana Bacik, please.
Minister Humphreys, today on Nakba Day, we stand in solidarity with the people of Gaza and of Palestine. Amid the horror of Netanyahu's genocidal siege on Gaza, the compassionate response of people here in Ireland has been really notable. We see people here standing up for human rights, humanitarianism and international law. We've seen it in recent weeks in the incredible activism of students in Trinity and across other campuses. We've seen it this week in the generosity of spirit shown by Bows Football Club, the women's team and supporters and others towards the Palestinian women's football team who are here. And I saw it last week on a visit to Ratoath in County Meath, when 7-year-old Minnie McDermott handed me a handwritten letter she asked me to pass on to the Taoiseach, asking him to take stronger action to ban trade with Israel. She was so distressed, as so many children across Ireland are, to know about the treatment of boys and girls her age in Gaza, being killed, being under siege, facing famine. Minister Humphreys, across the island, communities are showing solidarity with the beleaguered people of Gaza. And this is what makes the continuation of Irish trade with companies in the occupied territories all the more perverse. There have been positive moves from your government, and I do appreciate, as we all do, the government's movement towards recognition of the Palestinian state. That's very welcome. We've been proud of Ireland's steadfast support for an immediate ceasefire to bring an end to the horrendous killing in Gaza and a return of all hostages. Yet those actions are undermined so long as Ireland remains so financially embedded in Israel's economy. And while trade ties remain with Israel, we are indirectly funding all that we find so abhorrent. The incursion into Rafah, the destruction of aid at the border, the killing of children, of medics, of aid workers by the Israeli Defence Forces. Brutal scenes this week alone. In 2023, Minister, Ireland imported €3.6 billion worth of Israeli goods. In the first 2 months of this year alone, €608 million worth of Israeli goods came into the state, and Ireland remains a top 10 importer of goods from Israel. Minister, I think this statistic must appall all those who are calling for action, all those taking steps in their own lives to stand against war. And while we continue to wait for that delayed review of the EU-Israel Association Agreement at EU level, we need to see action now from the Irish government. Minister, we must urgently see passage of Senator Francis Black's Occupied Territories Bill, and the repeated dismissal by government of opposition proposals to sanction Israel are really frustrating. We hear that you cannot legislate to bring about trade bans, but Minister, the treaties governing EU trade make clear that exceptions can be made where bilateral trade is contrary to public policy or public morals. And as our Labour colleague Niamh Harrigan put it, famine hovers over the people of Gaza as a horrific spectre, but companies continue to export at leisure. So Minister, do you not agree that now is the time to pass the Occupied Territories Bill and introduce meaningful sanctions, meaningful trade sanctions on Israel now?
Mr Humphreys.
And thank you, Deputy, for raising this. Just to say that the Taoiseach has confirmed this morning that Ireland will recognise the state of Palestine by the end of this month. And just to say that we are urgently calling for an immediate and sustainable humanitarian ceasefire, the unconditional release of all hostages and full, safe and unhindered humanitarian access. The protection of civilians must be paramount. It is an obligation under international humanitarian law. Accountability for civilian deaths is essential. Ireland calls for de-escalation by all actors in the region. and regional de-escalation and the protection of civilians and aid workers must remain the priority. We need an immediate and durable ceasefire now, and sustained and unhindered humanitarian access to civilian population is essential, and all hostages must be released. Can I say that Ireland is not financially embedded? There was a small investment by ISAF, and that has been divested. In terms of the Occupied Territories Bill, can I just say the government's position is that the bill would not be compatible with EU law and would therefore not be implementable. This is the clear legal advice on this matter. The government will therefore not be taking it forward. Ireland's opposition to illegal Israeli settlements is unambiguous and is grounded in international law. To adopt a unilateral approach that runs contrary to legal advice would undermine Ireland's stance on this issue and on our broader advocacy on compliance with international law. And can I just say, we have worked very hard with the relevant authorities in Gaza to facilitate the exit of Irish citizens and immediate dependents who have expressed a wish to leave, and the Department has been able to assist over 100 Irish citizens and dependents to leave. This is a difficult, very, very difficult situation, and what we see on the television is just heart-wrenching stuff. It really is. But we have been very clear in calling for a humanitarian ceasefire. And just to finish off, can I too just commend Bohemians Football Club, like Deputy Carthy did, and yourself, just to say that commend them for entertaining and for bringing over the Palestinian women's team, and I wish them well, and just to thank Bohemians for doing that. I think it was the right thing to do.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Batcher.
Well, thanks, Minister, and I think we all acknowledge and warmly welcome Bohemians Football Club's actions and hospitality to the Palestinian team. And I have welcomed the moves towards a Palestinian state at the Taoiseach's comments today, and indeed the support for ceasefire. But we do need to see more meaningful steps taken on trade. You've said that the government opposition to the Occupied Territories Bill is based on legal advice, presumably from the Attorney-General. But I want to know, when was that advice given? And why has it not changed since the war began and since we've seen the escalation? And we're seeing further escalation even this week alone that is leading US government policy to change. Article 24 of the EU regulation on imports from non-member states allows for bans on the import of goods on the grounds of public morality, public policy or protection of health and human life. Same exception applies under Article 36 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union regarding goods in circulation within the EU. I cannot see how a ban on the importation of goods does not fall under these grounds. So can I ask, will you ask the Attorney-General again to update advice in light of the continuing escalation of genocidal actions, of killings, of besiegement, of the looming famine, of the looming ground invasion of Rafah that we're all so fearful is going to escalate matters to an even more unthinkable degree of horror for the people of Gaza? Why can we not see an updated advice from the Attorney-General that takes these matters into account in considering the government approach to the ban, to this Occupied Territories Bill?
Minister, please.
Thank you. Can I just condemn the incursions into Rafah? These people have nowhere to go. It's something that I know we all condemn in this House, and it's wrong that people are left in that awful situation. In terms, I've been very clear on the issue of the Occupied Territories Bill, and something that we have taken legal advice on, and it's something that we have taken legal advice on, and Ireland's opposition to the illegal Israeli settlements, it's unambiguous. It's grounded in international law, as I've said. You've asked, will we look at it again? These things are always kept under review, but I can't see that the advice is going to change. But nevertheless, I take on board what you're saying.
Thank you very much. We move to the third question, which is from Deputy Michael Lowry on behalf of the regional group.
Minister, I also wish to raise with you the special needs issue. Raising a child with special needs is both challenging and rewarding. It is demanding yet fulfilling. For parents, it becomes a labour of love in almost every possible sense. They want what is best for their son or daughter. They want their child to have the best possible start in life. They plan for the years ahead when their child may no longer have their care and support. They aim to set the best foundation to support their child throughout their life. I attended an Action for Autism rally in Tipperary earlier this month. This event was organised by 2 mothers who have reached the limit of their endurance. They and most of those who joined them have battled for years for services for children. Seeing parents of children with special needs marching through the streets to fight for their children's needs is a heartbreaking sight. They have come to believe, with good reason, that seeking what their children urgently need through the established channels is a fruitless exercise. Today I received a letter signed by all of the teachers in Skullcormac and Cashel. It sets out a catalogue of neglect. The school community there is suffering because of lack of resources and lack of services. For as long as most people in this House can remember, there have been calls to regulate, reform and resource all areas of the special needs sector. There have been some improvements which are acknowledged and appreciated. However, the reality is that they merely touch the edges of an issue that is impacting the most vulnerable members of our society. Parents' demands for their special children are no more than any child in the country deserves. They are pleading for timely assessment for their children. This is the first hurdle on their journey for their child. That is what will guide future decisions. The reality is that this is the hardest hurdle to cross. The most recent figures available show that there are almost 7,000 children across the country waiting for such assessments. The outcome is crucial. It will establish if they need disability, health or educational support. It will determine the road ahead. While they wait to be called for these assessments, the lives of the family and most especially the child are left in limbo. Their next hurdle is finding a suitable place in the educational system and proper SNA support. This can be soul-destroying for the parents who face many closed doors before they hopefully find one that will open to them. All the while, Minister, the lives of these children are on hold. And I have to say that it is a sad reflection on government and all of us here as members of this House that as a country and as human beings, we are continuing to let down these children and their families. This is a legacy and current issue that should unite this Dáil in meaningful action. You referred to the Taoiseach taking initiatives. Could you please update us on relation to what progress has been made on those initiatives and when could we expect to see results?
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, and thank you, Deputy Lowry, for raising this issue. And I know that this is something that you feel very strongly about. And I know that you have advocated for Skullcormac in Cashel. Look, I spoke about this earlier. We all have the experience in representing our constituents of meeting parents who are waiting too long for the assessment of their children's needs, and then also for the therapies that they need. And we have to do all we can to relieve the pressure. The Taoiseach has established the new Cabinet Committee on Children, Education and Disability, and that includes the responsible ministers and departments. The committee has already met on a number of occasions, and the issue of disability has been front and centre. And I know at the most recent meeting there was a focus on the waiting list for assessment of need and how we can increase the use of the private sector to deliver results for families waiting long periods. Private assessments are already taking place, with 16.5 million has already been set aside for the HSE to procure diagnostic ASD assessments through the private sector, and this work is being led by the Taoiseach, working closely with Minister Anne Rabbitte and Minister Stephen Donnelly, and I have to say that Minister Rabbitte works day and night in terms of this area and how she can do more to support, and she does hold her officials to account, I can assure you, because I've seen it firsthand. In terms of special education needs, that's also an issue that Minister Hildegard Naughton, who sits at the Cabinet table, totally committed to, along with Minister Foley, to providing more spaces for children with special needs. There's 7 special schools and 2/3 of all special classes have been established by this government. We'll open more special schools this year, and capacity in special schools around the country will also be increased, as has happened in recent years. A significant number of new special classes, 400, have already been sanctioned for September of those arrangements, and 300 has already been sanctioned for September. Of those arrangements having been finalised for approximately 300, with the remainder being identified in the coming weeks. But that's not to say that as this work continues that we don't have huge sympathy with a family looking to secure a special education place, and I'm aware of that, and I know how difficult it is for families, and sometimes the special education places in mainstream education, it does not meet the needs of the child involved. They may need to go to a special school specifically for that purpose, and we are committed to improving those services. So I just want to thank you for raising it.
Minister, Deputy Lowry.
When we had COVID, the health service came together and we used the private sector to very good effect. In this case here, we had the big problem is with assessment. And we do not have enough of psychologists, child psychologists in the public sector. They are in the private sector. We should make a once-off effort to get them to combine and do whatever is necessary to reduce the backlog that is there. There are people, young children, waiting for 2 and 3 years for an assessment, and it's simply unjust and unfair and needs to be dealt with. Also, Minister, there are 100 special schools across Ireland. And the reality is that number is failing to meet demand. Similarly, many special need classes in national schools are also struggling to cater for those who need a place. And in terms of providing appropriate education, the special school and special needs classrooms model has proven to be successful. Special needs children get lost in mainstream schools. There is neither the time or the opportunity to nurture their abilities. So I would say, finally, Minister, there is a need for increased access to specialised services offered through special needs education. That is what parents are demanding. That is what they know is required and what their children need and deserve.
Thank you. And just to say, in 2021 we did clear the list. And there is a framework in place there, and there's 16.5 million available to procure the services for special needs assessment in the private sector. So we do need to clear the list. You're absolutely right there, and we will do it, and the funding has been provided. In terms of the special needs schools, there's 7 have been established over recent years in a number of areas, whether it's Cork and Dublin, but for 2024-2025 school year, the focus is on areas outside of the larger cities. There's schools opening in Meath, Kildare, Wexford and Limerick, and I know there's 2 counties. Well, I know my own county of Monaghan doesn't have a special needs school, and Deputy mentioned earlier that there's not one in Leitrim. So these are the areas we have to look at as well, where we need to have more special needs schools. Capacity in the special schools around the country will also be increased, as has happened in recent years. The Department of Education and the NCSE work closely on the forward planning of special school provision, and since 2020 a total of 55 building projects have been completed across 41 special schools, and during 2022 and 2023 alone the school building programme provided accommodation for 80 additional or modernised classrooms in special schools, and we've all seen them in our own constituency. They are state of the art, they are providing a great service, but I think that there are many cases where it's not suitable for the children. Maybe they need to be in a special school, and I accept that, and it's what's best for the children, and that's what we're focused on.
Please.
We welcome some members of the families of the 27 Dublin victims and the 7 who lost their lives in Monaghan, along with the representatives of the Justice for the Forgotten, yesterday for Sinn Féin's motion on the 50th anniversary of the Dublin Monaghan bombings. I welcomed that motion, and the families welcomed that the government were supporting that motion. But one thing the motion has failed to address is the fact that the families of the victims of those 2 horrific acts have never had the Garda files released to them or their legal teams. It does refer to the material from the Operation Denton, but a number of TDs raised issues yesterday. The Garda investigation was now famously inadequate. The State's response was callous and uncaring. The investigation was closed after 10 weeks. Files related to the investigation were lost or destroyed. The Barron Commission criticised the investigation for ending too soon. The forensic evidence was mishandled. Evidence and files that should have been sent north after 24 hours were not sent for 11 days. It then went missing. Garda forensic technical expert James Donovan, who was sent some material to test by the Gardaí, was not made aware that material went north for 25 years. The forensics team in Dublin did not work in cooperation with their counterparts in Belfast. Not one survivor of the bereaved family member was interviewed by the Irish police in Dublin or Monaghan after the atrocity to date. After 50 years, not one policeman knocked on their doors. John Boucher, who initially headed up Operation Denton, was the first policeman to knock on people's doors as part of his report. Bertie Ahern, when he was Taoiseach, said that nothing in the files that would have suggested or indicated who was responsible. If the files are so clean of evidence, why haven't they been released to the families? And they should be released now. There have been 29 ministers for justice since the atrocity. None have been willing to release Garda files to the family's legal team. Two ministers, Nora Owen and Mary Gagan Quinn, told the families at the meetings to go and find your information, and if you find something, come back to us. The investigative material represented to the McEntee report has been blocked to the family's legal team by government using the Commission of Information Act 2004. This will stop family members and legal teams from seeing this material for 50 years, Minister. We are calling, and I'm calling you, and the families are calling you to release these materials immediately to the family and their legal team. This was an investigation mishandled by the Gardaí. The aftermath and the grief of the victims and their families was mishandled by the state. Your Taoiseach acknowledged that last night. The families want to see the investigation files. They still haven't been allowed to see them. They will have to wait decades before the Commission of Information Act 2004 no longer applies. Will your government commit to releasing the Garda files and the investigation materials to the victims, their families and their legal teams immediately? Get your own house in order, and then I think we can go to the British state and ask them to get their house in order.
Thank you, Deputy Collins. Minister.
Thank you, Deputy, for raising this. And of course, we commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Dublin Monaghan bombings at the end of this week on Friday. The legacy of that atrocity lives on in the memory of many. I know that from my own town of Monaghan. And the people that it impacted on, the people who lost their lives that day. I know the bomb in Monaghan went off outside what they called Greason's pub. There was children came home to their parents, but they were taken. I was just reading the story. There was two children actually in a hall, and their father had dropped them in. He had went into Greason's, obviously for. Went in there and was waiting there. The bomb went off. The children were brought home in the panic, and then the news came later that their father had been killed. Well, he had been badly injured in the bomb. And as I say, it's 50 years ago, but the legacy lives on. Can I just say that this government has supported all-party Dáil motions. There's been agreement right across the House here in terms of motions in relation to the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. It continues to be a priority for this government, and the Taoiseach and the Minister of Foreign Affairs has consistently raised the previous motions with the British government, most recently with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland on the 18th and the 29th of April, and will continue to do so. Look, it was something that we discussed yesterday at Cabinet. It's something that, as I said, there's agreement on right across the House here. Regarding the Garda files, I can't give you a commitment on that, but I do give you a commitment that I will raise it with the relevant minister and with the Taoiseach, and to see if any further progress can be made. Thanks.
Minister. Deputy Collins.
Last night, the Taoiseach said, today we mourn the families, the great loss suffered by the victims of the bombs of 17th of May 74. We offer our humble acknowledgement of the obstacles that they've had to overcome and maintain they have climbed to get their campaign to where it is today. We recognise our own past shortcomings as a state and political system, and I think we have to recognise that on this commemoration, 50 years. We have to recognise that. And I think the families more than anything would welcome the government now stepping in and releasing those files, the Garda files. I know you said you raise it, but they should be released. It should be announced as soon as possible. And also the information that the Commission of Information Act has on their files. They should be released immediately to the families. And a line of communication, like the line of communication that has been set up with the Stardust families, should be linked in with these families now, so that their legal teams and the families can start asking the government for what they need to get justice and truth in relation to this. And that's what they want more than anything.
Yeah, like you, Deputy, I have engaged with the families of that terrible atrocity, and I know some of them extremely well. It has been a long journey, difficult time for them, and I think, in fairness, as the Taoiseach has said, we need to look once again and try and get access to those files, and I take on board what you say.
Thank you very much, Minister. That concludes Leaders' questions. And we move now to questions on policy or legislation. 1 minute maximum. Deputy Matt Carthy, please.
Today marks the 76th anniversary of the Nakba, which saw 15,000 Palestinians killed, some 750,000 expelled. The 7.5 decades since has been marked on the one hand by the repeated breach of international laws by Israel, and on the other by the failure of the international community to hold that state accountable for those breaches. The world has essentially given Israel licence to disregard international law, international humanitarian law and the UN Charter. In recent times, this has been evident through settlement expansion in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, attempts to undermine UNRWA and diminish the status of Palestinian refugees, all of these proceeding without sanction, indeed without consequence. And today, the world watches as Israel conducts a genocide against the people of Gaza. And the question the people all over the globe are asking is, will this time be different? Will Israel face consequences? So my question to the Minister is this: what actual consequence will the Irish government impose on Israel for its actions in Palestine?
Minister.
Thank you. Well, as I said earlier, Deputy, the Taoiseach has said this morning that Ireland will recognise the state of Palestine by the end of this month, and I think that's a very important step. As you said, EU member states and the international community have made it very clear that an Israeli military operation in Rafah will inevitably lead to disastrous humanitarian consequences and the deaths of large numbers of innocent civilians. We urge Israel to cease its operation in Rafah immediately and to avoid further escalation. Israel must facilitate safe, unimpeded access of humanitarian aid to the civilian population of Gaza, including through the Rafah and the Kerem Shalom crossings. And look, we're working obviously together with our EU partners, and the Council recently, European Council, adopted conclusions on the situation in Israel and Gaza at its meeting in March, and the Council also urged Israel not to undertake a ground operation in Rafah.
Thank you. Deputy Batchett, please.
Minister, yesterday the Minister of Health said he would love to see talks resume with thalidomide survivors. There hasn't been an engagement from government with thalidomide survivors for a year, more than 60 years since withdrawal of the drug from the market. Thalidomide survivors need justice, Minister. They've called for a state apology and a proper compensation package. I've raised this many times in the Dáil. The government is full of soothing words but is failing to take action. Last December, the Australian government issued a state apology, so why won't the Irish government reignite a swift resolution process and give thalidomide survivors a date by which this process will be recommenced? And can I ask, Minister, why was the support for Irish survivors of thalidomide bill, which was listed in the spring legislative programme, why does this appear to now have been dropped from the summer legislative programme published in April? Is government no longer preparing a bill on this? Are we seeing, in fact, a delay, a further delay on any meaningful engagement with thalidomide survivors who've been waiting so long for justice?
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. And I'd just like to acknowledge the presence of, I think, Fionnuala's in in the gallery. Finola, yeah, is in the gallery here today. I know that the HSE has a senior manager who liaises with the Irish thalidomide survivors. They've carried out a consultation process with survivors on their health and their social care needs now and into the future. So the bill was actually, it was paused because of the consultation with the HSE. So that will, when that consultation is finished, it will then proceed.
Deputy Holly Kearns, please.
Thanks.
Minister, almost 4,800 children are waiting for child psychology appointments. That's across Cork and Kerry alone, with nearly 2,900 waiting for over a year. These young people are struggling, have made the crucial and difficult first step of asking for help and are being denied it. Many of these children are struggling with anxiety and depression, are in desperate need of early intervention before their mental health difficulties get worse. Minister, there's very rightly been a focus on the shortcomings in our CAMHS service, but there seems to be a blind eye turned to the crisis facing primary care psychology. The waiting list in Cork and Kerry has grown by 25% in under a year. And in their response to my PQ, the HSE pointed the finger directly at the government's recruitment embargo. Half the funded posts in the service are vacant, and the HSE can't recruit the psychologists that are needed. Minister, when is the government going to stop pretending that the recruitment embargo isn't having an impact? And what are you going to do to address the crisis facing primary psychology services in this country?
Thank you, Deputy, for raising this. This was an issue as well raised at the Cabinet Subcommittee last Monday. It is getting prioritisation as the Cabinet Subcommittee deals specifically with youth education and disabilities. That was an issue that was raised and we are prioritising to address it.
Deputy, yes, please. Yourself. Yeah, sorry.
Today is our day, and 76 years ago today, 600,000 Palestinians were expelled from Palestine. And Palestinians across the world mark this day in terms of the catastrophe that continues to this day. And no adjectives could sum up what's happening to the people in Gaza at the moment. Persecution, being tormented, brutalised, murdered, exiled and jailed. I could go on. Now, Minister, I ask you, 15,000 children have been murdered by the State of Israel since October the 7th. What sanctions is this country taking against a country that can brutalise and murder that amount of people in that short a time?
Thank you, Can Corla, and thank you, Deputy. Today, as you say, is Israel or Nabka Day, and it marks Israeli Independence Day and Palestine Nakba Day. Both days are today. These dates serve as a reminder of the deep historical complexity that surrounds the current conflict. As I said earlier, the Taoiseach has said this morning that they're going to recognise the state. We're going to recognise the state of Palestine by the end of this month. We work across Europe with our colleagues and we make every effort we can, and we continually call for an immediate and sustainability humanitarian ceasefire.
Sorry, no, you've asked a question already. I'm sorry, Deputy. Deputy Pather-Tobin. You know the answer. Deputy Pather-Tobin, please.
Minister, Mary Bartley Meehan lost her son and her husband to COVID-19. When her husband Ultan died, his face was discoloured with black congealed blood. It had become infected, and shockingly his face had become infested with maggots. The Minister for Health, the Department of Health, the HSE, HICWA and the Ombudsman have all refused to investigate so far what has happened. Practically every second night, Mary herself has nightmares in relation to that infestation. And she said yesterday to me, she says, "I hope I don't die without them saying sorry to me." Now, Mary is just one of thousands of families who lost loved ones during COVID-19 in the nursing homes. North of the border, we see the COVID inquiry in full swing. We see the hypocrisy of Michelle O'Neill laid bare in relation to that. But in this part of Ireland, we don't have a COVID inquiry. We don't have a terms of reference. And we don't have a government that actually has any will to carry out this investigation. Now, there were 2,300 lives lost in the nursing home sector during that period of time. And I'm asking you, why is it that this government don't want to investigate what they did in relation to
Thank you,
COVID?
Deputy.
Why is there no terms of reference?
Deputy.
Will you confirm to me today that there will be an investigation with the powers to compel papers and people before the end of this government?
Minister Butler.
For your question, and you raised Mrs Bartley Meehan yesterday evening again in relation to the new HIQA bill, giving more powers to HIQA to be able to go into private and voluntary nursing homes and to access details, which is a direct response to the expert panel that was put in place during the time of the horrendous times for many, many people in nursing homes. I have met in person with Mrs Bartley Meehan. I have worked with Mrs Bartley Meehan on a couple of issues. I'm not going to discuss them here on the floor of the Dáil, but in relation to your substantial question, that is a decision for the government. I did apologise to Mrs Bartley Meehan in person myself.
Thank you very much, Minister. Deputy, you've asked your question. Deputy Matty McGrath. Please, Deputy, you're taking up time from other. You're taking.
A question and answer by this government in a COVID investigation is.
Sorry, you're out of order, Deputy. Deputy, you're out of order. You're out of order. I won't call you again. If you can, of course, it's very important. It's very important that you adhere to the rules of the House. You're out of order. You're out of time, and if this persists, you won't be called again.
Minister, the childcare sector is in crisis. The government has injected funding into the sector, which has thankfully made childcare more affordable for parents. It has now created such a high demand that services cannot accommodate the people because they can't hire staff. Childcare facilities are now routinely turning away families and have waiting lists are getting bigger and bigger. And vacant positions advertised for a number of months and nobody applying for them. The sustainability of the sector is really at risk as childcare professionals who are highly trained are not being paid the rate that reflects the education and skill that they have. The childcare facilities cannot meet the increasing costs of business and pay the rate to the staff as well that they deserve. So there's really a huge issue here. You've given the extra funding and created the extra places that big demand, but they can't meet this demand, and many of them are struggling, and they've contacted all TDs all over the country. Is the same. So we need some swift action to be taken here to support these long-standing excellent facilities.
Minister.
Raising that. I believe that in terms of the childcare sector, there is an employment regulations order in place, and I understand that they're back in negotiation again.
Independent Group, Deputy Collins.
Minister, I've raised on several occasions the severe lack of certain services across the Dublin 12 area due to a localised lack of public health nurses. We've seen resources taken from one centre and given to another, as was the case in a temporary transfer of nurses from Curlew Road in Drimnagh to Armagh Road in Crumlin. There's one public health nurse for child checks and one older persons. People still can't get service for themselves, their children, their families. We need increased service in Dublin 12. In 2011, Drimnagh was promised those increased services in the form of a Drimnagh Primary Care Centre. It has been 12 years with no delivery and continued services. 6 months ago, in November, the Minister for Health stated that a consultant had been appointed to prepare a strategic assessment report on the proposed centre at Curlew Road. And I'm requesting, Minister, that your Minister provides an update on that report and on the progress of delivering that centre.
Minister Butler, yeah.
For raising this issue, and I acknowledge that you have raised it several times over the last 2 years. During oral questions on health, only 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, Minister Donnelly addressed that question, dealt with that question as well. And he has asked the HSE to come forward with proposals, and he said he will engage with all the deputies in the area to try and find a solution. Public health nurses are hugely essential for both young babies and their mothers, and also for older people as well, to be able to live well in their own homes. Thank you.
Deputy Richard Bruton, please.
Congratulate the Minister on her initiative of bringing in a pension for those on carers allowance. But I'd like to see progress on two other programme for government commitments: the proposal to extend free GP to those on carers support grant, and to develop a carers guarantee that would provide a core basket of services across the country. I'd ask her to sit down with her colleague ministers to develop that. I think what we need at local level is a family care partnership with flexible support for family carers, where they can register, share information, get flexible support. And I think that's a missing piece, not unlike the community care service, the community welfare service. That sort of flexibility is not there for supporting family carers.
Thank you, Deputy Bruton. Minister.
Deputy, for raising this. We have improved the supports available to carers considerably over the last number of years, and I know that you welcome the carers' pension that's now going to come into place, and I think that's very important to recognise for many the huge sacrifices that they have made in caring for their loved ones, particularly parents of children with disabilities. We've also expanded a number of other supports there in terms of the means test, and we have expanded we've increased the limits and the amount of money you can have in savings. Just to say that Minister Butler has committed 1.9 million to a carers guarantee, and that's something that it's a fund. Within that, there's a fund for respite for carers who would benefit from that, and I think that's very important. But I will raise the issue you've raised with the Minister as well.
Deputy Christopher O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Count Corla. Minister, I'd like to follow on from Deputy Bruton's question in relation to carers and go a step further and use this as a pre-budget plea, that we would use Budget 2025 as an opportunity to once and for all take away that income limit and that means test for carers allowance. Time and time again, every TD in this House is faced with situations where carers are coming into their offices and they might be €100, €50, €20 over the means tests. But there's absolutely no flexibility and no discretion used by the department in terms of awarding carers loans. These are people who dedicate their lives, dedicate every minute to looking after loved ones. These are the people who need our help the most. I'm asking that consideration will be given at the very least, that we do a cost analysis of what it would cost to get rid of the means test for carers loans in Budget 2025.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Deputy O'Sullivan. Yeah, look, wherever you draw the line when it comes to means test, you're either this side of it or you're that side of it. There's always going to be winners and losers. So no matter how high the bar goes, there'll still be losers. I was glad from June. A carer can earn €900 a week for a married couple, and it won't impact on their payment. So that has been increased, and it kicks in June. And of course, coming up to the budget, I do look at all these things. But I think in looking at the means test for carers, we also have to look at the level of care provided, because we all know the carers who are providing 24/7, and we have the other carers getting the same payment who provide considerably less care. I'm not saying any of it's not important, but it's a hugely reduced level of care. And I think in tandem with any lifting of any means test, you have to look at the level of care provided.
Minister.
And I think that is. But I know probably you're thinking of the parents who are 24/7 with a severely disabled child, and those are the situations that we're all aware of.
Deputy Morris Quinlivan.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, in recent months I've raised the challenge faced by the Kayla National School in Limerick City, the need for additional support for that school. It is a school in the second most disadvantaged area in the state according to the public, and there's 186 students in that school. School assessments by themselves have found that 72% of the children have at least one additional need in that school. The staff have been pleading for supports for 2 years, supports that have still not been delivered. Separately, I raised via a parliamentary question the wait time for 2 ASD support units at Corpus Christi National School in Moyross. The response received confirmed that the school was approved in 2020 to provide 2 special education needs classrooms and 4 SET rooms. Yet 4 years later, and the response says it is not possible to give a frame time as when this project will go to construction. So we have supports needed in one school in a disadvantaged area. ASD support classrooms are waiting construction in another disadvantaged area. So, Minister, why do these schools in Limerick remain under-resourced despite a gaping need for the additional supports?
Thank you. Minister Naughton.
Deputy, for your question. in relation to special education, as Minister Humphreys has said, we have a special cabinet committee now in relation to making sure that health, education, disability, children are all working in relation to children with additional needs. Just in relation to my own remit, a third of our education budget goes towards special education. So for this coming school year, there is 400 special places being allocated. 300 of those have already been allocated, and the last 100, the department are working very closely with the NCSE and the schools in relation to those. I'll come back to you directly in relation to that specific area, but what I can say right across the country, and in my remit, I want to ramp up the resources in relation to special education. A lot of really good work is happening, but we need to make sure the NCSE is being resourced as well, and directly on the ground, working with schools, identifying areas that need to be supported.
Minister, my colleague Teachta Mairead Farrell has been repeatedly raising the crisis in the apprenticeship system with the major backlog and the waiting time for off-the-job training. Just yesterday I was contacted by a young person in County Roscommon. He is one of the 9,000 waiting to complete the off-the-job training. He was due and should have been starting phase 2 of the training in February 2024. He's been told now it will not start until April 2025. So he will wait 14 months for phase 2 of off-the-job training. This will add at least an additional year to his apprenticeship before qualifying. We know apprentices are dropping out. We know that the average time now to actually qualify is close to 6 years. If a teaching or a nursing course had an additional 2 years to complete, it would not be acceptable, and it shouldn't be for our apprenticeships. So I want to ask you, Minister, what is going to be done by this government to ensure that apprenticeships have a decent and proper term before they complete?
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. And actually, I was here yesterday when your colleague, Deputy Mairead Farrell, raised that with the Taoiseach, and he did say that he would raise the matter with the Minister, and he actually agreed with what she was saying. So, you know, we are investing in apprenticeships to support the skills needs. I think the apprenticeship narrative in this country has completely changed, and that's a good thing. So if people are waiting, we will do everything we can to address those backlogs.
Deputy David Stanton.
I just want to ask the Minister about the 41st Amendment of the Constitution Agreement on a Unified Patent Court Bill 2024, which I understand is before the Seanad, and I want to know if the Government will support its passage and its enactment so that it will be ready in time for a referendum. Thank you.
Minister.
Hear the first bit, Deputy.
Sorry, the 41st Amendment of the Constitution Agreement on Unified Patent Court Bill 2024.
Eamon's going to take it, sorry.
Mr Higgins.
Thank you very much, Deputy Stanton, for your question on this. Firstly, just to confirm that the Government is absolutely committed to ensuring that we're making patents easier to obtain in this country. As you'll be aware, the Taoiseach has indicated that we don't intend to have any referenda between now and the general election, but this is something we will still continue to work on and to progress in the meantime.
Thank you. Deputy Eamon O'Cleave.
Minister, first of all, my commiserations to all of those who suffered or are suffering as a result of the Dublin and Monaghan bombings 50 years ago. But in view of this atrocity, the recent revelations in the Canova inquiry and many other incidents of counter-insurgency and the continued operation of British counter-insurgency activities, as is evidenced in the McFadden affair, will the Government call on the British Government to institute a full inquiry into past and present counter-insurgency activities by the British state in Ireland, north and south, and demand an end to such activities, which are totally illegal and unjustifiable? And will they work to ensure that the incoming government, and I think we all expect a government change in the UK, that they will commit to instituting such a thorough inquiry?
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Deputy, for raising that, and I do know that the Taoiseach raises those matters with his counterpart, the Secretary of State in Northern Ireland, on every occasion that he meets them. Particularly, the last meeting was on the 18th and the 29th of April, and they were raised at that meeting, and he will continue to do so. But I will raise your concerns with him.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Fianna is not here. Deputy Louise O'Reilly.
Minister, high-performance computing is at the core of the fourth industrial revolution and central to growing the Irish economy and securing next-generation FDI. Under the watch of An Taoiseach, when he was Higher Education Minister, Ireland's national supercomputer, known as K, reached the end of its life last November without a new supercomputer to take its place. Until we have a new national supercomputer in place, academics, industry and the state will have to use the national supercomputer of Luxembourg. The failure by government to invest in this critical infrastructure has embarrassed Ireland in the eyes of the European and international technology communities, and it will no doubt cost us the next generation of talent and affect Ireland's ability to attract the FDI of the future. Minister, can you give a commitment that the government will immediately release funds to secure a new national supercomputer?
Wow, I'd love to see it. Minister.
Thank you. As a former Minister for Business, I'm somewhat aware of what you're referring to there, and I know that we have, I think it's iCheck, do a lot of work in that area. I can't give you the detail there. I don't know why this hasn't happened. I'm sure there's a good reason for it, but I will ask the Minister to come back to you with a response to that.
Deputy Pringle.
Minister, I've been contacted by a number of residents of the Forest, Ballymacool, Letterkenny, County Donegal, who originally qualified for the cost rental tenants in situ scheme and were waiting for their home to be purchased by the housing agency, but then received an abrupt email from the housing agency stating that they would not proceed with the purchase with no explanation. Understandably, the residents were very upset by the situation and worried about being made homeless. Letterkenny, like everywhere else in the country, is very difficult to get housing in, and any that is accessible is an exorbitant price. Applicants should be given a reason for the refusal to purchase the properties and an opportunity to allay the fears of any within their control. The well-being of the family should be the top priority, and any further delays are simply unacceptable. It is imperative that the housing agency acknowledges the severity of the issues and takes immediate and decisive action to rectify the situation. Will you ensure that the housing agency responds to the residents as soon as possible and gives an explanation for the decision?
Thank you, Deputy.
That's what they're looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. If you give me the details of that, I'll take it up directly with the housing agency. The tenants in situ scheme has been very successful, as the cost rental tenants in situ scheme too. If a house isn't going to be purchased, they should be given an explanation for that. I'm not aware of the details, but just straight after this, if you give me the details, I'll engage directly with the housing agency and revert to you.
Many thanks, Minister. Deputy Patricia Ryan.
Minister, I'm wondering if you could give me an update regarding Cherry Orchard Nursing Home and the planned removal and relocation of elderly and vulnerable nursing home residents. I want to know what status of engagement has taken place, and has contact been made with the families and the advocates of late, and if so, how recent? As you're aware, the situation rose late in 2023, and our ongoing protest. Has the Minister met the families at the protest? And also, when do we expect the remedial work to be completed and this situation resolved?
Thank you, Deputy Wright. Minister Butler.
Deputy, in May 23, a HICWA inspection identified concerns in relation to the flooring in both the Sycamore and Willow units at Cherry Orchard Hospital. These presented a significant potential health and safety risk and a fire risk, and it's something that I could not ignore. It was proposed to move the residents on a phased basis. So far, 43 residents has been transferred from Cherry Orchard campus, with 17 residents still on site. There has been ongoing engagement with the residents, but I think for any minister who receives a report from HICWA to say that there was a fire risk in a facility which is a long-term residential home for older people, that you have to take action. And I stand over the decision. 43 residents has been transferred, with 17 more still on site who their families are not in a position to move them at the moment. There is spaces available for them, and the same terms and conditions will apply to these residents when they move.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy John McGuinness.
Count Cora, there's a significant number of parents who now cannot get places in the childcare sector in Kilkenny, and it is a serious issue for all of those concerned. I've written to the Minister, got a very poor response, and I think that there needs to be a strong government response to provide such places. And likewise, in terms of ASD units, schools are expressing interest. They want to have a unit. there is a demand, but yet the government minister, the department, or whoever is responsible, is not responding in the way that they should. We need to look after our children in both of those categories. And as I say, the parents are under severe pressure, and I would ask that there be action taken.
Thank you. Minister Abbott.
For raising the issues. In relation to the childcare issue, I do know that Minister Gorman in the last number of weeks has allocated 2 lots of funding to address the issue in relation to capacity, but I will raise the issue in relation to Kilkenny that you have raised here this morning. And at the Cabinet Subcommittee on Monday it was discussed in relation to ASD places, and it is prioritising that no child will be without a place this September.
Deputy Donegal Lira.
Yes.
Minister, GPs in Cork have raised concern over the removal of some 13,000 people from waiting list on foot of an NTPF validation exercise. Now, while I appreciate that obviously checks have to be made in terms of waiting lists, and we all want to see the waiting lists come down, we want to see it come down on the basis of people not needing treatment. It's our experience and the experience of GPs that many of these people do still require treatment. Many of them might have moved address, younger people and so on, and other people would have issues in terms of literacy. Can I ask you to raise with the Minister for Health the need to ensure that any validation exercises are robust and fair? I think phone calls could be a part of that. In truth, while I appreciate there's a scale to it, it can be really, really challenging, and I've had people come into my constituency office where people have been removed from the list and then they effectively have to start again. It's not dissimilar to situations in housing, and that can be really, really challenging for people who have been waiting perhaps a long time for treatment.
Mr Butler, please.
Who's on a long time waiting list validation is really, really important. We have situations where people can be on 3 or 4 waiting lists and they may already have received the treatment. However, if you want to give me the specifics of what you're raising there in the Cork area, I can have it raised with Minister Donnelly's office. But I do know that waiting lists are falling, and validation helps in those cases, because sometimes people might decide to fund services themselves, or they might do it through private health insurance. And it is very important that the waiting lists are accurate.
Thank you. Deputy Matt Shanahan, finally.
Minister, I had the pleasure of visiting Cappoquin a number of times in the last few months to review the RRDF funding, which is progressing very well, and thank you. And also to thank you for the recent grant of funding to Ardmore. But can I ask you, would your department have any oversight of rural supports for the Gaeltacht areas? And I'm reviewing parliamentary questions I received, which shows that the Waterford Gaeltacht received only €6,900 from a €38 million dispersal in 4 years, and also just €60,000 from a €14.7 million dispersal over 6 years. So I would ask, Minister, maybe your department might take over the development of the rural Gaeltachts, because it appears the Department of Gaeltacht does not know where Ballynadesha exists.
Okay. Minister.
I don't know if you heard the last bit, Minister, but anyway.
Yeah. Ardmore, yeah. Thanks, Deputy, and I've been to Cappoquin many times, and it's a fine place, and you're doing great work there. And 3.3 million was announced for Ardmore, and I know this was something that I have to say, my colleague here behind me, Minister Butler, was very keen that we'd support. So that's under the Rural Regeneration Development Programme. Now, just to say that the Gaeltacht areas do get support when they put in applications, because there was a Gaeltacht area in West Cork got support in the Rural Regeneration Fund only. That was announced on Monday. The name just eludes me for 2 seconds, but anyway, so they need to get their applications in if they want to get support, because there's a lot of places wonder why they didn't get it. And it's because they haven't put in applications, or else they need to work on their application. So anybody that put an application in and didn't get funding, I'd say get feedback from my department, because what we want to do is help people. We want to spend the money, we want to get it into rural Ireland. Over 160 million was allocated on Monday to projects all over the country. So for those that weren't successful, I'd say contact my department, get feedback. How can you improve your application? Because it's a case of, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Thanks.
That seems like a very valuable piece of advice. Minister, thank you. Thanks to Deputy Shanahan. We move finally to a motion regarding the report of the Committee on Standing Orders and Dáil Reform regarding a rota for leaders' questions. I ask the Government Chief Whip, Minister Hildegarde Naughton, to move the motion.
Move.
Is the motion agreed? Motion